Hi guys, so today's video is going to be part 4 of our Rhythm of 4 spoilery chat that directly goes with part 4 of the book. Before we get into it, I actually want to start with some general thoughts as opposed to just the chapter by chapter stuff, which I'll do here in a little bit. But this section for me is the weakest. We also finally go back to Shalon and Adelin, and I'll get into it, but when I did my non-spoiler review, one of my negatives was I felt like there was a certain plot line that wrapped up a little bit conveniently, and maybe convenient isn't the right word, because if I go back and reread the previous books, I'm sure there's groundwork that has been laid for the big reveal, which would be that Maya shouts, "We chose," that whole thing, and then also the Formless just being Shalon all along, and it turns out that her big thing that she couldn't remember before was that she had a spren and she killed it. Yes, this is sad, and yes, this is obviously part of what the whole thing is with the trial with the honor spren, so Shalon's fearful that Adelin will hate her, Dalinar will hate her, all of this stuff. But I'm kind of like, this is the secret though? Like, you killed your mom, you killed your dad, but you killing your spren is like the secret that you just can't remember anymore. I don't know. I kind of feel like killing your parents is a big deal. And I also don't really understand why this is the thing that she thinks that Adelin is going to hate her for, because he says at one point in the trial with Calden, when they're talking about, did you know one of them almost killed Syl? And he was like, yeah, but like, that was like, he didn't know what he was doing. And I'm just kind of like, Shalon's there. If Adelin knew this, that means she knew this too. If not before, then at least in that moment. So I don't know. I don't understand why she thinks like everything is gonna turn people into hating her. So I just feel like, I don't know, I was expecting a bigger reveal, and I'm curious if any of you feel that way as well, or maybe if this hit you really hard. I just felt like it's kind of like an Oathbringer, the big reveal that they're not necessarily natives of Roshar, and it's like this huge dilemma, and I'm like, is it though? Like, I wasn't that impacted by that reveal, and that was how I felt about this reveal as well. I just didn't feel like it was that big of a deal. I did really like the moment with Maya though in the trial. I liked that moment for her, and I even wrote down in my notes, can we have a Maya perspective? Because that moment was awesome for her, and I also really appreciated that Adelin, when he was kind of leading her away, thinks that she did it not for you but for herself. I really like that moment, and I like their relationship. I definitely want more of Maya, but the implications of all of that obviously are huge, but we don't really get to explore that very much in this book. So that whole plotline felt necessary, but I wasn't tremendously satisfied, I guess you could say, with how it went about. Anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way first, and you guys can let me know your thoughts about this, but I also wanted to say this because I know that I pick on Adelin a lot, and I know I don't love Adelin and Shalon as a couple, and I did not want my frustrations with all of this to be misconstrued as me just wanting to hate their plotline, but either way, I like I said, I think this was necessary, but I didn't really care that much. And then also we get so much more backstory with Venli in this section. And I personally, I know it probably wouldn't have worked because there are some reveals in these parts that are probably more impactful having read the other 3 books. But I kind of wish we could have just gotten a Parshendi backstory book between books 1 and 2, the way we have Edge Dancer and Dawn Shard. I think that it would have been more concise, and I think it would have allowed me to connect with them a lot more, because as of right now, I think I'm going to connect with them much more on a reread than I do currently. Their culture is so fascinating and so interesting that I think that that's what I gravitate towards initially when I'm reading about them, is just being amazed at the way they behave, their customs, those sorts of things. That's what I'm absorbing. And sadly, I almost feel like my emotional connection to them comes second because I'm so fascinated by the other stuff. And that's not a negative thing, and it's certainly not a fault of the writing or anything like that. But it means that when we are getting backstory that feels like it's more emotionally driven, I both feel like I kind of already know this information. And now I just want to go back and pay more attention, I guess, in the previous books, which that's why I'm kind of like, they sometimes were mostly interludes or the occasional chapter here and there. And I think if I could have had this as one compact story, maybe it would have been easier for me to connect with them. So anyway, now all of that out of the way, I can get into the chapter by chapter stuff, but I also wanted to say that before I got into it, because there will be a couple times that I'm like, Venli chapter, that's all I really have to say. Getting into it, starting with interlude number 7, and this is actually a fantastic transition into this. Speaking of backstories, in my notes I wrote, Zeth, can't wait for his backstory. I can't wait for Zeth's backstory. This is weirdly the opposite of what I was just saying. With him, I have so much curiosity that I'm like, when do we get more of this guy? Even though I don't know much about him, he's just so... There's just something about him that I always gravitate towards Zeth because he's so mysterious, and he's like an actually good brooding character. He's not brooding like I'm sexy brooding. He's just so mysterious and interesting. So this whole interlude, I'm sitting there like, what the heck? And I'm not gonna lie, him first off thinking about Gavinor and being like, he pitied the child, he connected with the child, and he's thinking about his own past. And I'm like, I want to know your past, but at the same time, I'm like, should Zeth be around that kid? Because I don't know, I was getting vibes like, I didn't think he was literally going to kill him or anything, but I'm kind of like, maybe Gavinor should stay away from Zeth. There is this quote that says, the boy's laughter frightens me because I am near and I am not well. I definitely just want to know more about the whole Highspren thing. That interaction was really weird. Also, everything with Zeth is always weird and different, and I just want to know more. And then we get into interlude 8 with Cherry, if that's how you say it, I'm not sure, but Cherry is precious. Anything that kind of sort of acts like a dog and just wants little scratches is always gonna appeal to me. One thing that annoyed me about Rysn in this part, because Cherry is super cute, but Rysn, Cherry's kind of like listening to what's going on, and so I don't want to talk about Dawnshard too much in case somebody hasn't read it. I don't want to spoil anything. But it's kind of established that the things that happen in Dawnshard are not to be spoken to anyone about, like anybody. And here it's like, hey, so you can't tell anybody, okay? Don't tell anybody. And I'm like, what? You went and told somebody? Come on, like I know this is an important person to you, but also maybe not. Don't tell them. Don't tell anybody. In interlude 9, I want to know, for those of you who haven't finished the book yet, why do you think the sword is such a big deal to Teravangian? I'm also really sorry to sound like a broken record because I say this every single time. Teravangian makes me so sad. He just ends the chapter crying and he's so emotional, and it makes me sad because I almost feel like he can't help it because he's basically different people from one day to the next. So when he's his dumb, super emotional self, he's just an old man crying all the time. It's really depressing. Speaking of old people crying and it being sad, in chapter 73, again, I know I'm a broken record, but the Jacqueline in this part, it says, Jacqueline's voice cracked and she trailed off. Jacqueline had forgotten the song again. The older Femelin turned away and cried softly. It broke Venli's heart. It broke my heart too, Venli. In chapter 74, we're with Venli, again, but present day this time, and I mean, the thing that stuck out to me the most in this chapter was the fact that they have people that are wearing the brand, and then Lyrin's all grumpy about it, and Venli's kind of like, I think it's because they think it's helpful, and he's like, ugh, and he's just, Lyrin's so obnoxious in this book. Chapter 75, finally, we're back with Shalon and Adelin, and I know some people really did not like how much time was spent away from Shalon and Adelin, but I personally felt like part 3 moved so quickly that it didn't feel like it was that long without seeing from them. And also, what the heck would we have even read about? They're just stuck at lasting integrity and chillin', getting ready for this trial. So I think I would have felt like it was filler if we just occasionally got a chapter with them and was like, Adelin and Shalon are trying to figure out what to do. I would have been super bored. But I am curious if it bothered you at all, if maybe you feel like the things that are happening in part 4 could have been incorporated into part 3 a little bit more, and then this plotline could have been spaced out. I personally think it would have made the pacing weirder because this stuff is happening so quickly back to back within their timeline that to spread it out, it would have felt like a bunch of time had passed when it turns out it's been a couple days or something, but yet we would have had it be so sparse from here to the next chapter you would get with them. So it didn't bother me that we stepped away from them. I will admit, there was a line. So the whole trial, obviously none of it really ends up mattering because it turns out it's not what they actually thought. which is fine. But I actually felt like this was an incredible dilemma because, of course, if things had been the way that we are presented them as, then it would have made the trial really difficult because Adelin needs to ask for help. But the thing I would have really liked to see is if maybe he had tried a little harder to understand, and I'm not picking on Adelin, no matter who would have been in this position, I would have wanted this, for them to try to understand the pain of the honor spren in this situation. So that would have been a really interesting conundrum, but sometimes it was a little, okay, there's this line in this chapter that says, it's Adelin talking, says, if you can call it justice to punish a man for what his ancestors did. That line, in context, obviously, like, I understand why he's saying it, but that line is, like, kind of borderline uncomfortable. I did appreciate that the person right after they said, you are the one who suggested this course, human. You took their sins upon you. This trial cannot possibly make remediation for the thousands murdered, but the dead I sense what is happening here. I like that they were like, well, you are the one who proposed that this happened, so that's a pet peeve of mine, a little bit. There's a book in the Ember and the Ashes series where a character's like, I will do this one duty to save people. And then as soon as, like, the next book starts, he's like, this sucks. Do I have to really do this? I don't want to do this anymore. I'm kind of like, honor your promises, man. Honor your promises. When we finally see Pattern again, though, and Shalon, oh, poor Pattern. My heart was breaking for a weird little Pattern. There's that line that says, I'm sorry, Pattern said, his pattern slowing like a wilting plant. I miss being with you. Oh, that was sad. She's like, you just wish you could spy on me more, is what she's thinking. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's what's happening. And then we get the chunk shortly after that. My copy, it's page 865, where it's super obvious when you go back to that part that she had another spren. In chapter 76, we see Rabanual and Navani again, and I just love them together so much. I tabbed this one part when Navani's like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna do this no more. And then Rabanual basically is like, why not? You guys basically beat us all the time. In chapter 77, we see that mysterious lady Extend again, who seems to be somebody from Mistborn, basically. And this person, but then they say Extend says she'd been discovered. She's a very specific and rare kind of specialist. The details need not concern you, but there's apparently another of her kind in the palace. Who are they referring to exactly? Because the kind of person that they are, the specialist kind that they are, I'm so sorry. I don't want to give away spoilers for other Cosmere stuff, but based off of them wearing rings, I think I know what they are. I'm sitting here, if you guys know, or if you think you know, you can write spoilers, but who the heck else are they talking about that would be like that? Because is it somebody we know? Or is it somebody different? Because there are only so many people who are this thing that I can think of. In chapter 78, when Pattern, once again, Pattern's so precious. That's what I wrote in my notes, Pattern is precious. When he's talking about the spy and talking about using the cube, and he says, I was so worried about you. I didn't know what to do, so I went to him, and he said we could talk with the cube if I was worried. About what was happening with you. He said I was very funny. He says none of your friends are traitors, except me. Only a little, though. I am sorry. Oh man, I was like, oh, poor Pattern. Why, Shalon? Why'd you have to jump to conclusions and then make Pattern feel bad? The reveal that the judge was going to be a herald, it was fine. I kind of wish that we had more information about the heralds throughout the series so that when moments like this happen, it's a bigger deal. Because when I got to that part, I was like, okay, cool. In chapter 79, I loved getting more Relaying because I feel like he's one of the members of Bridge 4 that we have seen very little of in comparison to some of the others. But I loved getting to see him, especially the fact that he so doesn't belong in any group, and I felt so bad for him because I'm like, Bridge 4 is your family, but then, you know, Bridge 4 is off somewhere else. Anyway, there's this line, though, when those women are gossiping about him, and I'm like, Relaying's a little sassy, and I like it. When it says, I thought you should know something about me. I figured maybe if you did, you would stop making things up. But then right after, because he talked about playing cards, right after that, when they're like, you heard him, he's a gambler, and he's like, ugh. I also wrote in my notes for that chapter that Lyrin is annoying, once again. But anyway, the next chapter with Calden and Wit. I loved this chapter. I love that Calden asked Wit to tell him a story, and Wit was all surprised, like, well, nobody ever asks. I also wrote down, because I was like, Wit likes dogs, because when he says they're fluffy and loyal and wonderful, and I'm like, Wit is officially, you know, like top tier Stormlight characters. I love this whole interaction though, and design, Wit's spren is hilarious. I love that Wit, who's always snarky and sarcastic with everybody, got a spren that ruins his stories and is constantly messing with him, and he's like, ugh, I got stuck with the worst spren ever. I love it. I also love this quote from Wit when Calden's trying to be like, okay, well, what's it mean, though? All that stuff. And he says, any meaning is for you to assign, Calden. I merely tell the stories. I love that because, I don't know, I get tired of people trying to assert their opinions on books as the right opinions by trying to claim that they know closer to what the author intended. And I'm like, it's art, though. I personally think stories are art, and art is up for interpretation. Also, though, in a more emotional part, at the end when Calden's kind of sad, basically being like, yeah, this story's not exactly going to be how it is for me. And he says, it will, but then it will get better. Then it will get worse again, then better. This is life, and I will not lie by saying every day will be sunshine, but there will be sunshine again, and that is a very different thing to say. That is the truth. I promise you, Calden, you will be warm again. That line made me want to cry, because I was like, yes, you will, Calden, you will. I really don't have much to say about the flashbacks. I know a lot of people did not love the flashbacks in this book. I also didn't really love them, but like I said at the beginning, may feel very differently upon reread. But then we get to chapter 82, and I tabbed this one very silly. Pattern just has some great moments in this book when he's talking about irony, and it says, irony tastes good like sausage. And have you ever tasted sausage? I don't believe I have a sense of taste, so irony tastes like what I imagine sausage would taste like when I'm imagining tastes. I'm curious, did any of you definitely root for Shalon to kill the herald? Because that's in this chapter they're saying, oh, you should kill them, and she's like, no. And I was like, please do. That would be a very interesting plot line. I also tabbed a part with Adelin in this section where it says, I hope to show them, Great One, that we are not their enemies, that the best course forward is for them to join us in our fight. It is, one might say, the honorable choice. Lines like that, that's kind of what I mean with their whole trial. Like, I wish the Maya thing, I'm glad it happened because it's interesting and I like Maya, but this whole development, I was kind of like, it could have been really tricky. And that's something I think Sanderson does so well, is he presents you with these impossible obstacles. He does it in this book. He does it with the tower where you're like, how are they going to possibly get out of this? Calden doesn't even really have his powers. All the radiants are down. I love that. I think he does it so well, not just in this book, but in so many of his books. And then here, I felt like we were doing that, where it's like, how is Adelin going to make this work? And I mean, you could say that Adelin, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of this specific chapter. I'm just talking about the trial now, but you can say that Adelin, by showing compassion to Maya, that is what is actually saving the day and winning the trial, if you will. But I would have liked this to be, I guess I would have liked it executed differently, or for it to have gone down a different direction. Like I said before, I mean, maybe I'm morbid too, because I was like, I would have loved if Shalon had killed the herald. Instead, she like shows up, like I said, I know I'm ahead of myself here, but she just kind of shows up, she's like, I'm not actually gonna kill you. And I'm just like, okay. Chapter 83, I actually found there was this passage with Venli where she was thinking about how she used to be. And it actually reminded me a lot of Adelin. I thought there were some parallels here when she's talking about goals. And it said she had become a person who wanted only to achieve her goals, not because those goals would help others, but because of the goals themselves. I mentioned in a previous chat the way that he thinks when Shalon says, we don't have to do this, we can turn back. And he thinks, and basically let down my father again, instead of thinking, oh, but then we won't have any honor spread for all of our soldiers. I just feel like there are some parallels between Venli's thought process as to how she used to be, and then some of Adelin's characteristics. Then we get freaking Lyrin again. Oh my gosh. My son is long dead, Bridgman. Calden kept trying to explain this, and I only recently started understanding. He doesn't want to be my son anymore. If that's the case, it's difficult for me to see him as anything other than a killer and an agitator, someone who recklessly endangered not just my family, but the lives of every human in the tower while pursuing a vengeful grudge. I'm just like, ugh, sorry, I read it in a very snobby way too, but I'm just like, dude, get over it yourself, come on. And he's projecting. okay, I know that's what he's doing. He's projecting because of what happened in the past, and he made some mistakes, really aggravating, because I just feel like he's not my son. My son is dead. He doesn't want to be my son. Since when? Come on. I don't know. I get very feisty over Lyrin's behavior. In chapter 84, we get more Rabanual and Navani, and I really like how well imposter syndrome is shown in Navani, and I feel like the very last chunk of this particular chapter, there's a lot of cool science-y Stormlight Archive magic discoveries and whatnot. I'm not going to talk too much about those because I feel like a little bit I need to reread them. Either way, the end of this section, this is what I like, is even when there's something really complex within the context of this world, there's still these moments like this one where Rabanual says, "This is amazing, Navani. I don't think I've known a scholar so capable, not in many returns." And then Navani says, "I'm not a..." She trails off, and then she says, "Thank you." And I really liked that. Because you see this throughout the book. You constantly see her being like, "I'm not a scholar. I just, like, tell other people what's going on, what to do. I just, like, tell people what to do. But, like, they're the smart ones." And it's like, no, man, lady, you're the smart one. Chapter 85 is fantastic. The whole Dabbid chapter I thought was wonderful. And the part... I tabbed a couple parts. So first it says, then Calden stormless. He hadn't cared that Dabbid was different. He hadn't cared that Dabbid had given up. Calden hauled him out and gave him another family. I loved that. And then on the very next page, when Lift is so ridiculous, and I love that he kind of threw her off when she said, "When'd you start talking?" And he said, "I was 6, Mom said." And then I loved the way this chapter ended, where he's thinking back on that time that Calden had helped him, and it said it felt good to return that act of heroism with a small one of his own. I loved that. I loved that so much. I love how we continue to build the members of Bridge 4. I just really like that Dabbid got this little moment, and this is the best found family ever. I love them all so much. In chapter 86, there's actually a part that I really liked that did hit on my emotions quite a bit, and it's when Eshonai is asking Venli if she can find a form where she can speak better, and Venli says, "I can try," and then it says, pleading sounding in her ears. Why pleading? She hadn't attuned that. "Then maybe I could talk to you," Eshonai said quietly, drooping from fatigue. "Without sounding like I'm trying to lecture. You'd know how I really feel. Mother would understand that I don't try to run away. I just want to see." And then, like, knowing what happens with Eshonai. But I just felt like that whole part, this difficulty in their relationship, and Eshonai just wanting to be able to communicate, and she can't really, and she... Eshonai is more interesting than Venli. In the next chapter, we're back with Adelin and the trial, and I really liked this one part. Where Adelin is thinking about the trial itself, and it says the consequences of failure had always been far bigger than his own life. The war needed radiance, and radiance needed Spren. If Adelin failed, it meant leaving thousands of troops to die without proper support. That's what I've been wanting. That's what I've been freaking wanting from Adelin for so long in this book. I was like, stop thinking about Daddy's expectations. Think about everybody. And I love this moment that we finally get. It's more... I know you guys, like, sometimes some of you are like, "I love Adelin, huh?" But you guys don't sound like that. I just mean, I know that I can possibly frustrate you with my own Adelin frustrations, but this is why I point out the things from before and my feelings, like when he thinks about what his dad's expectations are, as opposed to the weight of failure. And I love that we get that here. It shows character growth, which I like. Also, for those of you that totally hate the Adelin becoming Odium's champion theory, I did tab. This is for you guys. They serve Odium. Men might be changeable, yes. We might be corrupt at times and weak always. But I know evil when I see it. Odium is evil. I will never serve him. I do think I really want a moment for Adelin, because there's a passage on the next page that I'm going to read, and it says, "How can they not see? How can they sit here and judge me when men are dying and other Spren fight?" I want, because I just said the character growth thing, I liked that Adelin is recognizing the consequences of failure of this mission. In this moment, when he's like, "How can they judge me?" I want Adelin to have like an aha moment where he recognizes that he was one of the most privileged people in his world, meaning he had so many opportunities to help others. He was next in line to be king. And he kind of was more occupied with his wanting to duel, how he's dressed, the wine that he's drinking. He has all these things that he wants to do, which it doesn't bother me that he just kind of wants to enjoy life. That's not what frustrates me. But I want a moment where he recognizes, oh wait, there were a lot of slaves. There were a lot of issues with my own people. And what did I do when all of that was going on? I want a moment like that for Adelin, for him to recognize how seriously he turned a blind eye to the oppression that his own people had on the Dark Eyes. It's not that he is sitting here like, I love that we had people enslaved. I'm not saying that he was somehow like as bad as Sadius or something, but I just think it's really interesting in this moment where he's like, how do they not see? And I'm sitting here like, dude, how did you not see? How did you not see? That's kind of, I want him to have a moment, like a full circle moment. Chapter 88, there's a line with Eshni. Once again, I wish Eshni was around still. And when it says, everything I've done has been to ensure we remain our own people. That's all I want. I gave up my dreams, but I will not give up our minds. And I'm like, man, I wish Eshni was back, because she's so cool. In the next chapter, we have some more Rabanual and Navani moments that I love. And following up on the whole imposter syndrome thing, I loved this conversation between the two of them when Rabanual is questioning Navani on the fact that she doesn't refer to herself as a scholar in her journals. And then she says, if you are not a scholar, Navani, then I have never met one. I loved that line, and I'm like, can the two of them just have like a fun side quest where they're not enemies and they can just experiment together? I loved that Rabanual had the title stripped where she's like, I respect you. You don't have to call me anything fancy anymore. And then she's also like, I have a present for you. We shall sing, and that whole thing. And then after that, when she's asking Navani if she liked it, and Navani said that she did, and that the tones were a terrible cacophony when combined, but somehow beautiful at the same time. Like the two of us. Like the two of us. Why do they have to be enemies? Chapter 90, I actually, even though it was aggravating, appreciated that Adelin kind of snapped and messed up a little bit in the trial, because I feel like it would have been very outside his character to be just like cool and calm and collected. Like if he suddenly turned into Wit, basically, I would have been frustrated. So I appreciated that he was basically like, what? at that one part. But before that, when he's giving his speech, I don't know, this particular, I was like, are the Honorspren, do they like this? Do they really like this part when he says, people may not be perfect, but they're worth helping strive for perfection, and you are worth more than you can ever be sitting alone and refusing to grow. And that kind of ties back again to, I really want that moment where he's like, oh shoot, that's how I was. That's how I was before. I was kind of more concerned with myself, and you know what? If Adelin didn't want to try and like break down the system and stuff like that, if he was just happy to live his own little life, I could get it. But I want him to be like, that was me. When I got to the end of this chapter, I wrote down, do it. Kill the herald. Because when it says, I don't know, Formless said, the High Judge is one of the heralds. Maybe he'll end up surprising you. And I was like, oh, so ominous. It's actually Formless now. And then my hopes were kind of crushed because it didn't turn out to be that ominous after all. Chapter 91. This one hit me when Teff thinks that he's relapsed, and that was so sad, but then when he realizes he hasn't, and you're like, you're doing it, Teff, you're doing it. I also really liked when he realizes, oh, David's talking now. And he just thinks of it very simply. He's like, a man could choose not to talk if he didn't want to. Wasn't no law against it. Teff knew a handful of people who should maybe try a similar tactic. I also like the whole conversation they have with Calden, where Calden is questioning, is it right to fight? Should we fight? Is it actually going to cause more harm than good? And they're having this conversation, which I really, really like. It's not just like, okay, here we go, bam. I really like that they're reflecting and thinking about if it's best or not. And I really like where Teff says to Calden, we got to do what we think is best and be fine with that. It's all a man can do. I wrote down my notes, Teff is a better father to Calden than Lyrin. And the way this chapter ends when it says, Teff was worth saving. In the next chapter, I wrote, Rabanual is awesome for a couple different reasons. One, when Rabanual says, it is not for us that we fight, it is not for our comfort that we destroy, but for the comfort of those who come after. We sing rhythms of pain, so they may know rhythms of peace. And I like Venli's response as well when it says, and will he ever let us sing to peace? I really liked that whole exchange. But then The other reason that I wrote that Rabanual was awesome is I just loved this next part when Rabanual says, "You have served me well, a little distractedly perhaps. I ascribe that to your true allegiance being to Leshwi, and your reports to her interfering with your duties to me. I am sorry, Ancient One." Rabanual hummed to indifference, which I thought was hilarious. "I should have arranged for a regular meeting for you to give her your spy reports. Maybe I could have written them for you to save time. At any rate, I cannot fault you for loyalty to her." That's super fun. Rabanual is awesome. Why are more people not freaking out about how awesome Rabanual is? In chapter 93, knowing that Formless is just Shalon, I actually wrote down poor Adelin. Can you believe it? I wrote down poor Adelin because if Formless is actually Shalon, this part I was like, dude, Shalon, that's your man. Don't talk to him like that. Because when he's like trying to be nice to her, and she says, "Do you have a point with these questions? Because I don't see one." And he says, "I know, I'm sorry." And then he grimaces. "I'm not explaining it well. I don't think Shalon is as weak as you say. Weakness doesn't make someone weak, you see. It's the opposite. That is foolishness." I'm just like, dang, he's trying to be helpful. One thing that I'm curious about, and maybe one of you can clarify this for me. So it talks about how it turns out that Shalon was the one that killed Ela. Thank you for those of you that let me know, because I had been saying it Ela, that it was actually Radiant that had done it. Radiant admits, like, "It was me. I saw what you were going to, so I did it for you." That whole thing. But then when Shalon kind of soaks Vale back into her, and then she's getting all the memories that Vale had, and it says she remembered preparing the needle hidden in her satchel to kill Ela. That was one of the memories that she got when she absorbed Vale. And I'm kind of like, but it just said that Radiant's the one that did that. So, I mean, that's a stupid thing to point out. Maybe it's no big deal, but I just kind of was like, why does she have that memory suddenly back if Radiant's the one that did it? I also kind of liked the tie-in where "you cannot have my pain" in the next chapter when Maya says, "You cannot have my sacrifice." I liked that line. Like I said at the beginning, can Maya have her own point of view? I also love that she straight up points to Adelin and she says, "Not his, mine. My sacrifice," and it's in all caps. And then I wanted to also put in, because I joked with a couple friends, I was like, that what was hilarious to me is that like Adelin didn't really accomplish anything, just to like poke their buttons, just to be silly. I know he did, and it's reaffirmed here when it says, "The true trial, the one you've been engaging in for the last few years, the test for this Spren's loyalty. She was the only judge who ever mattered, and today was her chance to offer judgment. You passed." And then, of course, Adelin thinking, no, she spoke for herself. Don't make the same mistake again. I really like the whole thing. I do think that the whole way in which this happened, because there's a part where he thinks like, take some of my strength. And then it kind of almost seems like she's taking in Stormlight in a sense, because it says she looked right at him, and despite her scratched out eyes, she saw him. Adelin felt something, a warmth deep within him. Maya drew in air, filling her lungs, and then that's when she's able to speak. And I'm just wondering if there's going to be some kind of reverse with the dead eyes, if in a way it's almost like instead of having a Spren that bonds to you, if there's somehow a way that humans can sort of initiate that, and if maybe it gives power to the Spren instead of Spren essentially giving power to humans. I will admit, one tiny stupid thing for my taste is that I had seen, and I know a lot of people were predicting, that Adelin was somehow going to restore Maya, and I like the way it went about. I like that it wasn't just like, now she's a Spren like all the other Spren, and they're powerful Radiants. I like that it wasn't quite that, because I was like, I don't need another Radiant. I like somebody not being a Radiant and having the ability to make a difference not being a Radiant. I think that's definitely a much more interesting plot line, but I also just kind of felt like it still kind of was a little bit the prediction that everybody had, was that Adelin would somehow restore Maya, and it happened. And how big of a brat am I that I'm like, this prediction that we had, it happened. Ugh, like, isn't that what's kind of fun about making predictions, to see if you're right? And basically I'm like, we were right, darn it. Not actually super bothered by it. I just felt like it wasn't that surprising. Chapter 95 is another flashback, but I thought the placement of chapter 95 was kind of like, well, do we need that chapter? But here's one thing I want to say. I know a lot of people have not loved the backstory chapters, but they've been incredibly short, and there's not that many of them. They didn't even appear until part 3, and I don't think it's at all a bad thing to criticize and be critical of the fact that we get these backstory chapters that maybe don't feel super necessary and relevant. My only thing, though, is I have some complaints about the previous 3 books and their pacing and certain things being unnecessary. So in this book, to me, while I didn't feel like I needed every single one of these flashbacks, at the same time I'm like, yeah, but like the interludes are way less and they're really short and the backstory chapters are really short. And then I'm thinking about all the times that Dalinar was like, guys, will you try to go on a hunt with me? And people are like, no. And then he's like, will you go on a hunt with me? And people are like, no. And then in Oathbringer it's like, hey guys, let's do a Skype call and will you join me? And they're like, no. And I'm like, I've seen this all before. Why do we have to constantly see Dalinar try to convince people and failing? I just feel like we got so much of that, and after a while I was kind of like, I get it. There's just so many other things in Stormlight. I guess that's my biggest criticism of this entire series, is that I love so many moments. It's so impactful, it's so powerful, it's so fascinating, it's so unique, but every now and then, just a little bit, we get stuff that I'm like, do we need this here though? So I don't disagree that this maybe isn't the most necessary, but at the same time, I'm like, that's kind of typical, though, of Stormlight. In chapter 96, though, Venli annoyed me a little bit because I like when she was like, do you really want me around for when, like, things go down? And Relaying's like, I don't want you around right now. I was like, thank you. I love Relaying so much. But also him being like, but we need your help. And she's like, no, I'm gonna go help the other people now. And I'm like, dude, Venli, make yourself useful. Just do something. Just do something already. Chapter 97. This chapter, when you find out the reason that Rabanual's been wanting this knowledge this whole time. So sad. I felt so, I love Rabanual so much, and seeing that they just wanted their daughter to finally be able to actually die. And then though, the whole section's like gonna end with this crazy, now I'm gonna go try to do this to all the Radiants. And you kind of get it. You kind of get it, which is why Rabanual is such a great villain, because basically they're like, I'm tired of this never-ending war, so I'm gonna end it. And I'm like, I respect the hustle. And that takes us to the end of part 4. For those of you that have not actually finished the book yet, I would love to see your predictions, and of course I would love to know all of your thoughts about all of this stuff, your different opinions, your similar opinions, any little tidbits that you notice. There's some Thetacar things in there that are super interesting. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. We will have the last one up soon. I hope you'll have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.